Alright, so we've done these different couple of times now. So what I want to do this time is you're going in blind. I have just like a couple stops on the ride.
Alright, this is a 5-stop journey.
Well, until it's not a 5-stop journey. Hello and welcome back to the second party. I wanted to talk a bit about desperation and its role in problem solving. I think many people see desperation as an evil, when in reality it can be a powerful tool. It was for me. I want to start off by telling a story of how desperation helped me solve a large and important problem. In early middle school, at the end of 6th grade, I began to have a number of health issues. My head would be frequently hurting. I would need to run to the bathroom quickly, and at times I'd even be throwing up. It was pretty difficult to hold down food at some points, and just in general, I was feeling quite miserable. After missing a majority of the end of my 6th grade year, my parents started throwing everything they could at the wall. I just felt miserable, and we started trying things. We went through a method where you slowly eliminate things from your diet.
Because this was mostly digestive issues, right?
Yeah, it was primarily digestive. Part of it was kind of feeling lethargic, having headaches on and off, and it was a constant thing, basically a daily occurrence where I would have some kind of relatively major issue to where you just couldn't sit in class when you have to run up to go to the bathroom, or your head's hurting so much that you can't focus on what's in front of you. And after a while with this, we started doing kind of an elimination diet where you remove a lot from your diet and you slowly reintroduce things. And we started off with some of the same things that had been experienced by my mother, my sister, and my maternal grandmother. My sister had a number of stomach issues primarily, so same kind of thing.
Starting at a younger age than you, though, right?
Yeah, so same kind of thing from a pretty young age, I'd say 4 or 5. She had a number of issues, substantially worse than I did. And they had recently figured out something that was maybe 65 to 70% effective, and that was the removal of dairy and gluten, as well as a couple other things, more minor things from her diet. As a result of my sister needing to eat like that, my mom, who had minor issues since, I think as she described it, somewhere around her late teens to early 20s, she went on that diet as well. So at that point, my family was kind of throwing stuff at the wall, but...
So they started that before you did?
Yeah, so they started before I did, but it became quite bad for me all of a sudden near the end of 6th grade, like I said. And this resulted in kind of slowly getting introduced to that diet. But for a long time after then, I want to say maybe 2 years, I kind of lived in a state of, I'd say, denial. If you've ever encountered some potential medical thing that may be wrong with you, there's a part of you that, as illogical as it may be, is rejecting the diagnosis because you don't want it to be true, even though getting diagnosed would put you on a path towards an actual solution. So for maybe 2 years following that, I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, maybe only doing it 65, 70% of the way. And as a result, instead of frequently every single day having issues, it was whenever I would kind of quote unquote cheat or deviate from that diet, there would be like one day, let's say, where I wasn't feeling great or had some stomach issues.
And everyone knows how much of a breeze middle school already is for everyone, how much confidence you have and how good you feel about yourself in middle school. Just normally.
And it's definitely made better when you're eating food that's radically different than everyone else around you, opening it up at the lunch table and
people
kids are
making
commenting
fun of
on
you.
it. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm not trying to say that this, my middle school experience was uniquely bad or
No,
horrible,
that's
but
what middle school is for everyone.
yeah,
But
it's
yeah.
just kind of the nature of middle school.
So you were 60-70% in for a couple years.
Yeah. And then there was just one day where I sat down, and it was after one night where it was just particularly bad. I was feeling just horrible. And I got up and I started thinking, am I going to continue to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, or am I actually going to take the information that I have and make like a good decision here that's going to help me, even though there's a large barrier to entry. Like at least I have some understanding of what the solution is. Like I know so many people out there that have some health ailment, whether that be food related or not, and they're not able to figure it out. Like I was in a position where relatively quickly, I mean, even in comparison to my other family members, relatively quickly I was able to figure out what would work and at least have the choice of implementing that. And after thinking it over for a while, I just decided that I was going to accept that this was just something that I was going to have to live with and have to deal with. And, that wasn't fun. And there was a point where you're kind of, John Deloney from the Ramsey Network talks about this, where when something radically changes in your life, it kind of feels as if you've suffered a loss of sorts, almost like something's died. And what's died is your past dream, your past vision of a future. And as silly as it sounds, like that dream of a given future can adhere to and speak to all sorts of different things. So there was a period of like almost mourning of the future that I wouldn't just get to eat normally like whomever. I wouldn't just be able to walk into a restaurant and order whatever I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, following that level of mourning and acceptance, there was almost a sense of like liberation of, okay, well, now I'm not going to have to live in concern that at any moment this is going to crop up and I'm going to have some issue.
You're gonna be in the middle of an exam, and like I'm gonna be sick
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah,
Like, I need
you're
to leave
in some sports
right
event and you
now.
just feel abysmal, just horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of like desperation. I think desperation is a severely underrated feeling. Like there were so many times where I would be just feeling terrible. It would be 1 a.m. and I'd be having just a horrible time in the bathroom, just desperate for any semblance of a solution, anything that would make it even slightly better. And funny enough, like even when that was presented with me, there was still another hurdle to get over. But I think that sense of desperation after feeling horrible for so long, I think that's a highly motivating factor. I think it's something where you almost have to hit rock bottom to really realize where you're at and to take some risky things that you wouldn't otherwise do. Like it's when you go about saying, well, let me investigate whether or not like the issue here is something as fundamental as like gluten or dairy or something like that, there's a portion of fear that maybe you're right and how much this is going to have to change your life. But when you're in that point of desperation, when you're actually at a point where something is so horrible, you start to realize the actual choice that's being made. It's, I can continue to exist in this terrible point, this point where I'm feeling just complete despair, and I can continue living here and coming back to this place on a regular basis, or I can confront and maybe find something that's even worse. And I've seen this with people a lot where like they've not yet reached that complete point of like desperation where they're willing to try anything. And I think that when you're at that point, Like, necessity breeds ingenuity. When you're at that point of, well, let's throw anything we can at the wall. Let's try and figure out whatever we possibly can here. That's where you start finding some really profound, unique solutions that maybe wouldn't be able to be found by others. Like my sister, for example, like she dealt with this for a lot longer than I did. A lot longer. And they went to a number of different doctors who did allergy tests to just no avail. Every time it came up, absolutely no issues. And then they started eliminating things from her diet, and they found out something that worked, and she's been doing that. And then that compounding effect has allowed others to not have to suffer as much. I've encountered and seen a lot of people recently in a lot of situations where people recognize that there's a problem, but do not actually want to investigate or understand what a solution could look like for that. So, let me give you an example. For a while, I was having some issues in my lower back. I was kind of walking around and you'd bend down in a certain way, and my back would really hurt. And my wife had had some back issues, and as a result, you had investigated a number of different beds at a relatively young age, right?
Yeah, I was probably 12 or 13 because I had scoliosis, and my doctor had recommended that I get a bed that would help with spinal alignment and be supportive enough.
Yeah.
Not only just to kind of help my back, but also just for pain mitigation because I had varying degrees of back pain. So the bed was one of the things that my doctors had told me at the time. Look into a bed, getting a bed that's supportive, and he really recommended memory foam to me at the time just because of the support, but also like give that you get with memory foam and kind of contouring your body, keeping your spine straight, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
And that helped you a lot, right?
oh yeah, I mean that there were a number of things that I had to do for my back, but yeah, I mean the bed, like I became a little bit of, I guess, what's the word?
Little Princess and the Pea.
I became a little bit picky with my
Sure.
beds.
Sure.
And my mattresses, yeah, because I had my mattress that was great, and it was like sleeping on a cloud. I felt amazing, and yeah, anytime I had to sleep in a different bed or a different mattress, I was a little bit of a stickler about it, because nothing was as good as my bed.
Yeah. And then when we got married, we got kind of a hand-me-down or less than ideal bed that we used for a while, for a good portion of the beginning of our marriage. And then when I began to have back issues, we had a number of conversations, and finally there was one point, and this is maybe the point of, let's say, desperation, but in this case it's much less severe, where I think it was maybe 10:30 or something. We were having a lengthy discussion about different characteristics of beds and how one could go about solving this issue, right?
As one does at 10:30.
Yes, it's a common occurrence, I'm sure, for many listening. And after talking things over for a long time, we ended up looking into different mattresses and found something that worked really well for us, and this was able to resolve our issue because we had gone through the exercise of confronting the problem, realizing that it was a problem, understanding the different risks that we would be taking by trying to solve this problem, right? Because there are always risks when you're going about solving a problem. And
Well, and how long did I complain about our bed?
it was a while.
Because I complained about our bed for a long time.
Yeah.
But I never necessarily approached the conversation about, like, hey, let's really thoughtfully consider pros and cons of a bed. What, like, we sleep in this thing every night. This is maybe important, especially if you're having back problems. And I am, predisposed to back issues. Like, Maybe we should think about this. But I complained about that bed for a while.
Yeah. And yes, it didn't happen on the first conversation, but once we had a serious conversation about it, we moved relatively quickly after that to find a solution to the problem. By contrast, my parents have talked about having back issues or back pain and not being terribly satisfied with that, and they sleep on very standard to old mattresses. And
Well, the spring mattresses.
yes, just a standard spring mattress.
Spring
And
mattresses.
and I want to be clear, like you don't necessarily need some fancy mattress, and I'm not saying that anyone should definitely go out and buy a fancy mattress, but if you are encountering actual chronic or serious pain points or issues, and that's you suspect that part of it may be as a result of how you're sleeping, like if it's a back issue, then you should very much consider investigating something to solve that issue. And both of us, I think individually as well as together, have brought up with my parents that perhaps that's something that would help alleviate some of these back issues that they're having,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah. I've
There have been a
talked
number
about
of conversations.
I've talked about my love for memory foam mattresses because this was always my thing. Like I had my memory foam mattress and it was like sleeping on a cloud and it was amazing. And I distinctly remember like both of your parents at one point, like I was talking about how I like memory foam. I think maybe even your sister too, just like being like, what on earth? Like, no, like memory foam, that's gross. Like I would
Well,
never.
so I understand to some degree their position because, well, I grew up with them, and that that can sometimes be informed by past experiences with something or past preconceived notions. I think what's key to highlight here is I've had plenty of poor experiences on a memory foam mattress, and I've had plenty of good experiences on one. And plenty of that is based on preference, and I'm sure a portion of it also is based on quality. But the point is that we would have a conversation with them and propose that potentially, not necessarily even that memory foam is the solution, because that's not what we were asserting. What we were asserting was that perhaps resolving or getting a mattress that actually fits and works well for you could either help or potentially resolve the back issues that they're having, right?
Or just considering that as part of the
Yeah.
solution
Yes.
rather than, I don't know how they ever purchased mattresses before, but it sounds like it wasn't a very conscientious purchase. It was just kind of
Yes.
like, let me lay on this. Oh, yeah.
Kind of on a whim,
All right,
yes.
this feels fine. This one. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that you looked into it a lot more than that. Like, at least that's the impression that I got.
Yeah, and actually you highlighted something perfect there, which is, yeah, and there's a perfect clarification, which is that we are not necessarily asserting that that is the solution. We are saying that could be a solution and is at least worth investigating
Right.
if you actually care about the problem. And the issue is my parents have not investigated that at all.
Not that I've seen.
Yes, I agree. And on a similar note, I've seen this with a number of different things. So my parents and the mattress, I've seen that with my mother has continued to have some ailments and food things to the point where it's quite severe and affects her daily life. And yet, like when we sat down and talked to her about it, there's not, let's say, clear documentation as to what has been tried before. I think one of the examples that comes to mind about someone who is actually in a point of desperation where they're experiencing something really bad and they're just throwing everything they can at the problem and coming up with some highly unlikely solution is Michaela Peterson, or Jordan Peterson's daughter, who had, I believe it was juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and potentially some autoimmune conditions, and those seemed to be put at least into remission when she went onto an all meat diet. And I want to be clear that I'm not advocating that anyone go on an all meat diet, let's say, but I am using this as an example of someone who went about, who was in a difficult situation, had a problem, tried a number of things, and was able to come to a highly unlikely conclusion or solution that works for that person because of a place of desperation and kind of like a necessity to solve the problem.
Well, and I feel like something like going on an all meat diet, like I remember when you first told me about that, I was like, I didn't even believe you because I was like, that's not a thing. Eating only
Yeah, I
meat,
mean,
how on earth would you do that? Like, I didn't even believe it, or it's such an outrageous idea for a diet. But I think that only goes to show, like, in order to actually adopt something like that, you have to be at a place where you're so desperate for something that you're willing to accept something like that or adopt something like that or even just try it just in case it
yeah.
might help.
I mean,
Now
yeah,
unless you're like one of those, gym bros who eat steak for breakfast and lunch and dinner and like you'd be perfectly happy
sure.
never
Yeah.
eating anything except steak. But other than, I mean, you know what I mean, like the idea of just eating just meat, I mean, that sounds crazy to.
Yeah, I mean, it does. When I first heard it, I agree. Like, it sounds crazy. And I want to be clear. Like, I have not tried eating all meat for any lengthy period of time. You've not done so. And, like, I don't know that I'm going to try it. I'm not advocating that people do. But, again, like, when you're in a place of desperation, when there's a serious problem, and you're throwing everything at the wall. That's how you encounter certain things like this. And perhaps eating an all meat diet helps 0.0000001% of the population. And if it helps you with something that's seriously unbelievably chronic and you're able to remove that ailment by eating this diet and you want to do that and it's worth it to you, then more power to you. Like I'm unbelievably happy for you if you're able to figure out something like that. I think the issue often is that people see these problems and in their own life, whether it's something as seemingly trivial as having back issues or not getting great sleep, and they don't realize just how much that thing may affect them. Like you can sit here and go, oh yeah, well, I just have back issues every once in a while or I don't get great sleep. Well, if you're not getting great sleep, that really adds up. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're frequently having even headaches on a daily basis, if there's some larger thing that occurs every single week and is an issue, like this compounds over time. If you're having a sleepless night and you're up for an hour every single night, like that's hundreds and hundreds of hours a year that are wasted because of some problem. And I think oftentimes people will see that as the trees and not for the forest that it becomes in mass.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think most definitely. Because it's really easy just to fall into a daily habit of like just get through this day, get through this week, get through this,
Yeah.
that you parse up your life so much into these little time increments you're trying to get through. And it's like, okay, well, I got through this difficult week at work. Cool, I'm going to call that a win. And now it's out of my mind. Like
Yeah.
something happened. This issue that I've been running into, yeah, this came up, but like it's over now. It's out of my mind. I'm not going to think about it again.
Yeah.
Of course, until it happens the next week. And then you have to think about it again, but you just tackle them as they come and you don't look at the bigger thing of, okay, how can I maybe solve these issues at the core of what they are rather than just facing the tiny battles as they come.
Yeah. And I think, when you obviously need to sit here and resolve that which is in front of you, but you also need to take a second to look up and look at the bigger picture and understand, like, maybe you ought to be trying to solve the core of an issue if it's something recurring. You want to,
Yeah.
especially with things like that, investigate every solution under the sun that you can conceive of, right?
Yeah. I guess I kind of see it as the difference between like problem solving and process improvement, if you will.
Sure.
Problem solving is, oh, in this instance, something just happened. Let me figure out how to resolve that. So that's, you know, oh, I can't sleep tonight. I'm so exhausted. I need to take some melatonin just to resolve this. Or,
Sure.
oh, I'm not feeling well today. I feel sick. I need to stay home from this event so that I can,
Yeah.
whatever. Versus process improvement is like looking at over the long haul, like where are there inefficiencies in how you're, I mean, generally this we're talking about the context of manufacturing. How are there inefficiencies in your manufacturing process
Yeah.
where you can make improvements? But in your life, like where in your life, where are there inefficiencies in how you're living your life or in things that you're having to deal with? Where are you wasting time, wasting effort, wasting quality of life because you're having to run into these little things all the time? Where can you make like systemic improvements to that to
Yeah.
improve the overall process that
Yeah.
you're running through your manufacturing line, if you will?
Well, and the other thing is you can problem solve or go through process improvement for something that is not necessarily an issue right now, right? So, for instance, let's say you're able to chop up food for dinner, okay? And you're able to get this meal made. Well, the meal is made, and maybe you even have enough time to make that meal, okay? So, where's the problem here? And it's like, there's not necessarily an issue with this, but there are things that we can do to make this more efficient. So this particular example I got from a YouTube channel called Think Before You Sleep. I think it's a great point and kind of slots in here. But he was talking about making meals and how much longer it takes if you don't know how to properly cut things, if you don't have good experience with prep work, with chopping, with knife skills, versus if you do. So in that example where you have more than enough time to create and make dinner and you can chop everything up totally fine, you still may want to sit down and understand how to better chop things, how to better cut things so that things can go faster. And then what happens oftentimes in things where you're process improving, where there wasn't a fault, is that there's some positive. So at the end of that, you have additional time and you can get a positive feedback loop. With that additional time, you can do further process improvement to exponentially increase your time over a number of things that you're improving.
I mean, the key difference, at least how I've kind of learned about it at work, is like problem solving is triggered by, for example, if you're looking at if you're looking at manufacturing yield data or output, problem solving is triggered by, we've seen a radical drop in, in yield this day or this time. Like we see a signal, a distinct signal that indicates something has gone wrong starting here. That triggers the problem solving process. Process improvement is different. It's not triggered by one specific signal one time that's gone wrong. It's, you look at the overall process and you have to think more like, rather than reacting to a negative thing, you have to think about being proactive about a potential positive thing or a way you can improve. And it's a very different way that you think about things.
Yeah, so I guess so you seem to be asserting that the problem solving is the, let's say, negative side of risk with things, and process improvement is the positive side. I kind of see this as a 2x2 table where at the top, column A is positive, column B is negative. So positive risk is where there's not necessarily something going wrong, but we could make things better. And negative is there's something going wrong and we need to try and make it better. And then on the side, you have something that is a one-time resolution in row 1, and in row 2 you have something that is a systematic thing. So you can have positive risks that are one-time or systematic, and you can have negative risks that are one-time or systematic. And I see...
Sure. So it's clean the stove versus figure out how to not make it get so dirty.
Yeah. Yes, but so cleaning the stove is one-time negative because it's dirty. That's a problem. Right?
Right.
And the other is systematic positive. But there are also systematic negatives where we are consistent. For the past year and a half, we've had poor yields on this product. That's a systematic negative versus a one-time negative is this product came back from a customer and had a fault.
This lot had significant issues.
Yes, but we've not seen but we've not seen that issue crop up on a regular basis, whether that be monthly, weekly, daily, whatever.
Sure. Okay, so your table, you're saying you have positive and negative risk, basically, in your columns. And your rows are maybe single instant issues.
Yeah.
Or an instantaneous occurrence or a one-time type of occurrence.
Versus
systematic issues.
Or recurring.
So what's systematic positive? That's like the best thing, right?
Yeah, so systematic positive would be, in the example of my parents, you could say if their backs weren't hurting and they were getting just enough sleep, there's still room for improvement. They could be getting better sleep even though what they're doing right now is sufficient.
I see what you're saying. So systematic negative is like we're systematically seeing a negative thing. Like I'm regularly
like the back's
not
hurting.
getting enough sleep.
Back's hurting.
Versus something that's systematically going fine, but then positively asking yourself, and the positive side, I guess the way I see it, positive is more proactive versus negative is reactive. You're reacting to a negative signal.
Yes, exactly.
Versus systematic positive is like, okay, this thing, where can I proactively try to make efficiencies and improve on it, rather than merely responding to a negative signal I've received. And then obviously the single instance row is, okay, in one single occurrence of something has come up, how can I proactively make this a positive thing?
Exactly. And I think that
versus one single negative thing has come up, one issue, I need to resolve this one issue right here, but it's not necessarily a systematic issue.
Yeah. So what I would say is too often people do not focus on the systematic positives, and oftentimes that's where the most potential lies. Like things that people, and you could even say, for argument's sake, that in the case of my parents with their backs hurting, they've now just accepted this as something normal, right? You can kind of reparameterize certain things where it
depends on your perspective of what is a negative versus what is normal, but
exactly. So what I'm saying is they may now have shifted. They may have had a paradigm shift to where they think that just having their backs hurting is the default, and as such, you could parameterize it as a positive risk, a positive systematic risk of resolving this is present. So a one-time positive risk is something's on sale. If I capitalize on it now, I can save money, and I would have purchased the thing anyway. Maybe I'm buying it a week early, but it's on toilet paper's on sale. I'm going to need toilet paper in a week. I may as well buy it now.
Sure.
It's the toilet paper I would have purchased anyway, and I can save $2.
I mean, the caveat there is you were already going to be buying it, not you're just making an impulsive purchase.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
Versus the negative is, shoot, we're out of toilet paper right now.
Yeah, we need to resolve that now.
And it's March 2020. There's no toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I got a soft track I think it was when I said problem solving versus process improvement.
Yes. No, I think it's interesting. And I think it's definitely a worthwhile investment.
This is what happens when I don't know what your agenda is.
I know. Okay, so let's bring it back around, okay? So we were talking about desperation. So when you're working out of desperation, you're investigating basically all available solutions, even things that a normal person would like just immediately write off, right? You're in that kind of brainstorming phase of just throw everything on the table. We're going to try absolutely everything.
Well, think about the kinds of things that humankind has done out of desperation.
Yeah, and
like the stories you hear, right? Like what's the guy who got lodged between a boulder and a whatever,
from
like,
the 127 Hours movie.
Yeah, whatever that guy
the movie
was
based off of him. Yeah.
But like
and he chopped off his
that was his solution,
yes.
right? Like you would not come to that solution
unless you were in a place of desperation.
You were in a place of complete desperation. Right. And maybe that's a weird example because it's like the thing that happened was traumatic and the solution is a traumatic thing.
And
that's not always the case, but
you have very few options at that point versus in some cases when you're looking to solve a problem and it's out of desperation, there's a seemingly infinite set of solutions and you've exhausted the obvious ones. So now we're going into the seemingly crazy but potentially maybe that Hail Mary that pans out. And I think about some examples of like Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson, stuff like that. But also, this got me thinking about sometimes the solutions that we come to don't seem logical at all. And we may be even like averse to trying those solutions for a number of reasons. The first could be we're expecting something else. Because by the nature of this, it's kind of a crazy thing. Mm-hmm. You could be expecting something else. You could not entirely want to accept the problem still. You could not want to accept the solution. You could just think that the solution is, let's say, like beneath you. And I was thinking about a story from the Bible. It's from 2 Kings 5. And it's kind of this interesting story where a military general is named Naaman is struck with leprosy, and he talks to some people, and they say, go to this prophet in Israel and ask him to cure your leprosy. And he goes there, and the prophet tells him, go and bathe in the river Jordan. I think it's 7 times. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he goes away very unhappy, very frustrated. And you would think, like, being told the solution to something as serious as this, like putting it in context, like you were not able to be around people. I mean,
you were an outcast. Yeah.
You're an absolute outcast, and you're suffering serious physical afflictions. Mm-hmm. And presumably he's being presented with a solution, and yet he's ready to walk away. Now, one of his servants convinces him otherwise, and some of his retorts are essentially, this is beneath me. I should go bathe in other places. How is this bathing going to help me? Like, there's every excuse seemingly in the book. But his servant says to him, if this prophet had asked for something even more difficult, but if you thought that it related, wouldn't you have tried it? And he kind of thinks, mulls it over for a second, and decides, yeah, he would have. So essentially the servant convinces him, well, why don't we just try it, right? You're in this place of desperation, kind of. Mm-hmm. Like, let's just try everything under the sun. And he goes and he bathes in the Jordan 7 times, and then he is cleaned, and he no longer has leprosy, just as the prophet told him. And, it speaks to some of our hesitation when a solution comes from an unlikely source. Some of our hesitation when maybe we want to sit or wallow in our difficult circumstances. It speaks to our aversion to certain solutions. Like I've heard a number of things about like Michaela Peterson and Jordan and their very odd diet. And I've heard so many people that are so unbelievably negative about it. And I just think, like, what if there's a solution like that that's seemingly crazy that you're missing out on because you're unwilling to try it, because you're unwilling to accept it, because you're looking for a solution in a different spot? You know, I think about like some of these unlikely solutions, and I think if you said to someone every time that you wake up, if you get out of bed, you spin around, and you clap 3 times, your day is going to go awesome. Okay? And you tried that once, you spun around and clapped 3 times, and it went awesome. Like, I'm relatively convinced that, maybe the next day you want to see if it's not awesome if you don't do it, but I'm relatively convinced that in the long term, if this continues, like, you're going to get up, you're going to spin around, you're going to clap 3 times once you've figured out that despite that seemingly being unrelated or being a weird solution, that you'll accept it once you try it out and you understand the odd truth of it.
So how do you distinguish between that and superstition then? Or people believe things like you can't, what is it? You can't walk under a mirror or something.
I thought under a ladder?
Yeah, that's what it is. You can't walk under a ladder. See, I don't know my superstitions.
Yeah, it's like the weird, like the black cat crosses your path.
Yeah,
or
like
step on a
things like that.
crack.
Like, how do you distinguish between the people who say, well, I've never walked under a ladder, and the one time that I did, I had a bad day, so now I'm never going to walk under a ladder again.
Yeah, so
like, how do you distinguish between superstition, or do you think there's validity to superstition in that sense?
Well, so I guess as a starter, let's talk about the first thing first, which is how does one go about determining whether something is like true or not, right? And
true versus superstitious.
Yeah, and I would say you go about it with a number of repeated trials, and if like you bring the scientific method to the table.
Okay, so you need So I'm thinking about
so with the standing up and clapping, like the first day, if you have a great day, okay, and then maybe the second day you intentionally don't do it. Okay, and if the day goes bad, then okay, like, or I guess in that case, the day could also still go good potentially, but
you need to be, I guess.
You would need a number of different trials. You need a lot of trials.
The other thing is not only just trials, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you can control the outcome reliably. So,
yes.
like, I'm thinking about when we do problem solving stuff, like I do this kind of stuff at work, and it's like, if we think that we've found the solution to the problem, we need to be able to show that we can cause the problem to
come back
yep. reliably
yes.
and repeatedly by altering the variable we've identified.
You should be able to flip it like a switch.
Exactly.
Yes.
You need to be able to do that. And I guess maybe that's what you're saying is like, if your superstition can't do that.
Yeah. So, bringing it back to some of what I was talking about before, like with the dairy and gluten-free diet that I've been doing for how long, there was in that 2-year period of time an obvious, very clear, very direct, very short time delay between having one of those things and a very specific ailment that felt a particular way on top of that. And like you said, you can flip it like a switch. Like, I can go eat a bunch of dairy and then within 24 hours have an issue, have a very clear, massive issue proportional to the amount of dairy consumed, and then not do it for a week and not have that issue again.
Have you tried that at all in recent years, or considered like just kind of recalibrating your switch, I guess? Because you've also talked about how you're like, I'm not interested in trying dairy again or trying gluten because I found something that works and it works, so like it doesn't matter.
That's a good question. There was a time where I accidentally consumed something that had both gluten and dairy. It was not a massive amount of this thing, but it was a decent amount of it. And I had a notable response to that within a 24-hour period of time. So, no, I do not toy with it on a frequent basis, but I'm confident that it has not entirely been eliminated. And, I'll speak to that briefly about, like not wanting to go back. There's definitely a hesitation where I feel like I've gotten used to a certain way of living now, even though it is definitely annoying at times. I've gotten used to it, and going back and thinking about the negatives that most definitely could and would likely come back should I no longer adhere to said diet, I think like that's not something that that at least I want to mess and play around with at this point, because it was so painful at times.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I guess I'm just challenging the idea of,
Yeah. And I'm not saying that it's not worth
you
testing.
You need to be able to control it with a switch. Like,
yeah, but how often do you need to test that switch after you've verified it the first time?
Yeah. I guess
I'm not saying that it's not worth testing or that I shouldn't, but I'm definitely hesitant, since the anticipated conclusion is I'm going to have some serious stomach issues and or head issues for.
So then how do you also consider if someone potentially is experiencing a level of placebo, that their trials are maybe warped, or you could make the argument that they might be warped by a lens of placebo? So like, someone is convinced that every day that they wear, mismatched socks, their day goes better, and every day they don't, their day is bad.
Sure.
Right? Like, how much of that is maybe placebo or self-fulfilling when you have in your mind, today's going to be a good day because I'm wearing mismatched socks.
Sure. So I guess let's speak to, I think there are two things there. One, how do you make sure that, at least in the initial diagnosis, that something is not a placebo? And especially if you're going to make, let's say, a radical change, because the mismatched socks, who really cares, right? But if you're going to make some radical change in diet, in way that you're living your life, in like maybe you're moving somewhere, right? Like these big changes, you definitely want to verify. So what I would say to the how to verify is, can you make it blind somehow? So earlier I said that I accidentally ate something, okay? What happened was, funny enough, my mom, who adheres to the same diet, accidentally purchased something that had dairy in it.
Yeah.
I asked, so I consumed this thing
multiple times,
and in like decent quantities.
In like a weekend.
Yes. Yeah. And then my stomach hurt, and then I asked, did that have dairy? And I was actually told no. And then we purchased this product, figured out it had dairy.
Like months later.
Yes, months later, we figured out it had dairy. So then, in my mind, right there,
well, we purchased it because it was so good. Because
yes, because it was so good because it had dairy. Yeah. So to me, there's the blind test, and like it's not a placebo, at least with that. Now, certain things you could say, how do I placebo test? Maybe there's not a great solution. Addressing the second part of your question, let's say with like the socks thing, okay? There is this is going to differ for everyone, but if you made some unbelievably small sacrifice, like putting on mismatched socks intentionally, or getting out of bed, spinning around, and clapping 3 times every morning, okay? Like these relatively small sacrifices, if that is a placebo, even if it is, perhaps it's still worth it.
Yeah, or maybe it's something like I mean, maybe you just really love mismatched socks. And you
Yeah.
just there's a psychological
Yes,
aspect of
the
like,
self-fulfilling
I
whatever.
feel
Yeah.
good today because I know I have mismatched socks and I really like that.
But I'm saying if you get up, if you put on the mismatched socks, if you feel better, at least in this vacuum, like, who cares why?
Okay, so what if someone is like, well, I feel better in this room of my house because I have salt crystals in there. And I have amethyst, and that means vitality. I don't know. I don't know the crystal stuff. But, well, what if it's just, well, I like purple amethyst, and so I feel happy and calm when I'm in this room. But you're marketing it as, no, this stone carries some level of like, this
Sure.
some
So,
level of like divine tranquility.
yeah. So, what I would say is in the wearing mismatched socks example, I specifically said, like, what are the negative consequences? And who cares if it's, like, just with you, okay? As soon as you start causing externalities, or as soon as there's some negative that's introduced, now we're changing the cost benefit analysis, right? Because earlier we were saying you're throwing on mismatched socks and you feel happier, okay? If we try and if we try and take the mismatched socks, okay, and extrapolate it to the degree that you're talking about the crystals, okay? If you're marketing these mismatched socks as lucky mismatched socks, okay, and they are not that way for everyone, now we have a negative externality. Now I start taking issue with it. When you
Or
start
maybe like
promoting
an
that,
objective falsehood when you say that, no, when you take it from, no, mismatched socks, I just like them, I like to look at them,
yeah,
or like, this crystal, I like how it looks, I like how it complements the colors in this room, and so that makes me feel like this room, or it contributes to, this room just feels like a nice room, it feels peaceful.
yeah,
When you take it from that into like, no, you need, like, you should put a crystal in your house because this is just how it is. Maybe the answer is when you extend it out and say, no, it's not just something that I like and makes me happy. No, it's something that you've kind of almost made an idol out of it. I don't know.
I I'm gonna push back about that a little, and like we'll address this at a later date with maybe talking about and defining what truth is specifically.
Sure.
But I would hesitate there, and I would say when it causes negative externalities, because let's say you sold socks, okay, and they actually were like some lucky socks, like
Let's
I
accept
don't know,
that premise.
like just
Yeah.
accept the premise, which is something that
Yes.
we do a lot
That is one of the
here.
rules.
Just accept the premise and move on to the point first, okay? But if you were able to create actually lucky socks and you sold them and marketed them as lucky socks, and every single person that bought them and wore them in whatever your instructed fashion was, if every single person that did that actually experienced that luck, I don't have an issue with it. Because there isn't like to me the issue is it comes down to false advertisement, which is a form of negative externality. If you say to people, and this is where I think that there are maybe some negative criticisms for some of these other methods, and this is why I do not go around advocating, oh well, everyone should be dairy free. Okay, there are plenty of people that handle dairy totally fine. There are plenty of people that have a totally reasonable consumption of dairy and get nutrients and plenty of great things from having dairy. It's not this closed and shut case dairy is terrible and horrible. Dairy is not good for some people. Like if you're lactose intolerant and you're having lactose, you're having dairy, like
If you're literally allergic to
not a good
dairy,
idea. If you're allergic to dairy, meaning you're having some anaphylactic reaction to dairy, don't have dairy. But if you have a totally fine relationship with it, you're not having health negatives. Maybe you try and remove it and there's no negative and you bring it back and you're like, I just don't want to have to deal with it. Great. Don't go dairy free. I'm not advocating it. I think the issue is when some people come in and say, well, this must be the way, like, this is the way everyone should be doing this. And I think that's some of why you see people pushing back so much on, like, the vegan vegetarian thing. Because oftentimes people in those communities, not everyone, but oftentimes you see people in those communities preaching it as if it's the only means of being healthy, as if there could never be a negative for anyone ever. And in general, when people say wide swaths of the population, this is the best thing for literally every single person out there, with no asterisk, with no qualifiers, with no, well, actually, it's not everyone, it's 95% of people, okay?
So then...
You should be concerned.
Yeah, so what do you mean when you say negative externality then? Because, I mean, just playing devil's advocate, the retort could be, oh, well, what harm are you really causing by advocating for people to wear mismatched socks? Like, who cares? You're not causing harm to people.
Well, if you're just advocating for people to wear mismatched socks and it's only positive, you're just like, woo, go mismatched socks. I don't think that's an issue.
Okay, fine, the crystals. If you're, or, you know, some of those more Reiki healing or whatever. If you're sitting here preaching that these crystals have these powers or whatever, or if you are going to sit here and say, no, not just mismatched socks make me happy and everyone should do it. No, mismatched socks carry a level of divine power to make your day happy.
Yeah. So the negative externality is someone goes out and purchases the mismatched socks, purchases the crystals. Let's say you go out and you purchase those things with the assumption that it's going to result in a specific thing. If that thing doesn't come true, because that thing wasn't designed to do that, like with the crystals, like with whatever. Gosh, I'm going to get railed by people in the crystals community, aren't I? If you go out and you purchase a freaking
Hey, make your argument
amethyst
for the crystals. Do it. Make your argument. I'd love to hear the
Fine.
argument.
Let's hear.
Like, honestly.
Apart from, I guess they look pretty. They fit my room.
I mean, they do. They look beautiful.
Yeah.
But
rocks can be pretty. Plants can be pretty.
Yeah.
Plenty of things can be pretty and complement a given room. So, getting back to it, if they say everyone should go out and buy amethyst crystals, okay? And you go out and buy amethyst crystals, believing wholeheartedly that there is going to be luck that comes upon you because you are purchasing this amethyst crystal and you have it up on your shelf in your living space or whatever, and that doesn't come true, then that's a negative externality because somebody just spent a bunch of time and...
Or you're getting into scam territory.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah, we're just talking about a scam now.
Yeah.
It's just...
Or the freaking, Joel Osteens who are...
It's just different levels of scam.
You gotta give money to my church and everything will go well for you, like...
Yeah, it's just different levels of scam. And that's not to say that everything needs to work for everyone every single time. Like they have pants and shirts and hats that say one size fits all. And it's like, no, it doesn't.
It doesn't fit
No,
me.
it doesn't. It's like, I put on some hat and it's like, this thing doesn't fit my head. It's not one size fits all. Okay? So...
Yeah, I mean, there's nuance to it. I'm just posing a question or a thought that I had. I'm not...
By the way, I do think that those things should say one size fits most. Because it somewhat borders on false advertising. I think it's generally accepted that people understand that it doesn't always fit all, but it should say one size fits most. I think
precision of language.
Yes, precision of language, Jonas. Precision of language. Thanks, everyone, for listening. At this point... In the last few episodes, we've had kind of a musing at the end. I think going forward, we're going to call this the Midnight Musing segment, where we talk about kind of a short form idea that I've been thinking about, something not worth fleshing out into an entire podcast episode. Perhaps it develops into something like that later, but just kind of a floating idea. out there. When it gets late in the night, people get a little bit more loose with their ideas. They're more willing to explore more odd or brainstorming type ideas. So that's kind of what this time I think is going to be designated for going forward. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good night.